You have your front office, your GMs, your AGMs, your even coaches, scouts, and that's where things get muddled, right? Because we're close to those people. It gets integrated more, former players go do this, former players go coach. So we think we know what goes on in that level. And that is the biggest trap.
What's up, guys? I want to welcome you to today's episode where I had the pleasure of sitting down with my client and friend, Jamie Westbrook, otherwise known as the Barrel Man, and you're going to hear why. After spending over 11 seasons grinding it out in the minor leagues, Jamie finally achieved his lifelong dream this season of getting called up to his hometown team, the Boston Red Sox. Now, Jamie embodies what it means to be relentless, and in our conversation today, he is going to share invaluable insights on how he handles the pressures to perform at the highest level. He talks about how he stays focused through the inevitable tough stretches of a long baseball season, and really why resilience has been the key to his long-term success. We're also going to dive into how players can develop a strong mental approach, how to turn setbacks into growth opportunities, and what parents and young athletes must do in order to cultivate the right mindset to thrive at the highest levels of the game. If you're a parent of a son with dreams of making it to the major leagues, or you're a player yourself, this episode is packed with advice and lessons that you will not want to miss. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with my client and my friend, the one and only Barrel Man, Jamie Westbrook. Today's episode is brought to you by Jamie Westbrook, a.k.a. the Barrel Man. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Good to be here. Good to see you, boys.
I love that. So I guess before we start, just want to make things clear for everybody who's listening. The intention of the show today is obviously to give these families and these players actionable steps, right? You're somebody who's obviously played the game a long time, which we're going to get into. But I do, as we kind of go through this, I want everybody listening to really think about the things that Jamie shares with us and really what can they take away from this conversation. So everybody who's listening is probably wondering, the Barrel Man, like, where does that come from? And I want to walk through some numbers for these people so that they can understand really who you are, how good you've been, and really what your journeys look like. So this is somebody who's played in over 1,171 career games, has over 4,800 plate appearances, has a little over 1,100 hits, over 100, or I guess the perfect number, 128 home runs, a career 279 hitter with a career 783 OPS. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, I'll take that.
It's pretty consistent.
You want me to just continue to go? But I think what's important and what's so unique about your story is those numbers that I just laid out for everybody. Those are your career minor league numbers, right? Yeah. So you've spent 11 seasons, parts of 11 seasons in the minor leagues.
Yep.
Now, going back to your nickname as the Barrel Man, that's exactly why they call you the Barrel Man. Like, you've done nothing, everything you've done, every step of your career, and we'll go through it, you've hit everywhere you've gone. But going back to my intention for everybody, this is somebody who has dealt with a level of adversity that I think people want to avoid, right? And I think your story is so unique because every step of the way, whether it's you've hit adversity at a certain level or they've sent you back levels and then you've had to kind of replace certain levels, I think you have so much to share as far as that goes. So as you think about your career as we sit here today, before diving into the specifics, how would you characterize the story and how it's gone?
Man, that's a great question. I think that it's gone exactly how it was supposed to go in the long run. I think there's been multiple times, as we'll get into during my career, that I was like, how am I going to pull this off? How am I going to reach this goal that I set out for myself? But yeah, it was just a bunch of lessons, and I'm happy for all the bumps and bruises, and it's made me the man I am today, the player that I am today. So yeah, it's been a wild ride to say the least.
Well, and you just said something that I think is so profound, which is everything needed to happen the way that it did, right? So if you went back and said, if I could change all of this and I could have gotten called up at 23, 24, 25, I think everybody would think you'd say, no, I'd rather that happen. Mm-hmm. Are you honestly telling me that the man that you are today is because of the adversity you faced and you wouldn't change anything?
No, absolutely. Yeah, would it have been nice to be called up and make it at 22 years old and make a boatload of money? Like, sure. But I feel like throughout this journey, I've learned so much about myself, met my wife, met incredible teammates, coaches. I've had impact on people. I've done some cool things in this game. So, yeah, I feel like what the game and my struggles have taught me is going to benefit me long after my playing career is over. And that's invaluable to me.
Yeah, no doubt. For everybody who has a son who's playing, I think it's great when their son is a physical specimen, right? They're 6'5", they're 205 pounds. They check all the boxes as far as that goes. You're somebody who hasn't had that luxury, right? You want to talk about adversity. I mean, you were somebody who's kind of come into your own really with everything stacked against you. You're 5'7", right? You are now 29 years old.
Right.
You were drafted in the 5th round, not the 1st round. You know, it took you 11 seasons to get to the big league. So it seems like you just have faced this, what I would call kind of like this insurmountable mountain. And yet, even in spite of all that stuff, you overcame. Is there one particular moment that you felt like things clicked for you? And if there is that moment or moments, let's talk about that.
I think there's plenty of them, right? I think each year you kind of take something from the year prior and try to improve on. I think the biggest thing for me was I never doubted my talent, my physical ability to do it. Like from a young age, even though I was undersized, like I knew I could play, whether that be tournaments across the country and travel ball or throughout the minor leagues. I always believed in that. But I think that I got to a point where I wanted to make it so bad that it almost crippled me in a sense of I was actually talking to one of my buddies a couple months ago about, you know, it's like, I want to make it, I'm doing well, da 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 da. And he's like, dude, you got to loosen the grip. Like you're squeezing the bat too tight. I mean, figuratively and literally, you know, like I kind of just allowed myself to let go of all of these things that I want. Not that I don't want them, but you can't want them too much because they're not going to come to you. If it's meant for you, it'll show back up. And I'm fortunate to sit here and it did for me.
Well, yeah, it's like control the controllables.
Absolutely.
Right?
And you hear that and you do that and you remind yourself of that, and day in, day out, that's all you really can do. But we're still human and we want to, you know, wish for this, wish for that, as opposed to just like, just keep showing up, man. Like, just keep showing up. And I'm so happy I did. And like I always say, it's hard to kill a cockroach. Like, you keep showing up, dude. Like, eventually you post, you be the type of person and player that people want, and you'll get your shot. And it's nice to be there because there's a lot of times when I wasn't sure if that would come, you know?
Going back to the start. So obviously you were born in Massachusetts. At some point at 10 or 11 years old, if I'm not mistaken, you moved, west.
10, yeah, 5th grade.
Right. You moved to Phoenix. Playing high school baseball, you were somebody who, as you said, you posted every single year, right? As a junior, you know, I think, what did you do, man? You hit like, was it 520, right? With 13 homers.
5 something with some homers, yeah.
Yeah, 532, 35 RBIs and 13 home runs as a junior, 434 in your senior year. I think a lot of families, they put so much emphasis on the numbers. And while the numbers are always important, you do have to put it in perspective. So going back to high school, how was the process as you were playing baseball, like going through the draft, considering college? Like, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, like my parents' biggest thing was like, my pops especially was like, books before ball. Like, you're going to be a good student first, and then baseball will take care of itself, right? So from a young age, I knew like academics is first, and you take care of that, you could do whatever you want. So for my parents, like they just wanted me to kind of get a scholarship to go play in college, right? Because they probably weren't going to be able to afford, 4-year university or something like that. So that was kind of my goal going into it. I committed to Pepperdine as a sophomore. They threw some money at me and we're like, all right, sweet. Like, this is taken care of. That was the goal, right? And then as I get into my junior year and you start playing more, select ball, and there's more scouts at games, and seeing other players that were in the same area as me that were a little older that I'd played against, I'm like, I could do this. Like, and my heart was on being a professional ball player. So yeah, by the time of my senior year, like I wanted to sign. Obviously, it was going to have to be for a certain amount of
Sure.
money and this and that, but yeah, that's kind of what I always wanted to do. Probably from junior year on, I would say.
Did you feel like you were somebody who, did you know how good you were, or did you need, because I think a lot of players need the reinforcement. So maybe that reinforcement comes when you go to these events against the best strength talent and you perform. Did you feel like was your journey?
Yes and no. I feel like I always had a sense of confidence about me. And I mean, like, the best evaluation for me as a player is like what your peers think of you, not necessarily the scout in the stands or, whoever else. It's like the people and your teammates that are on that field, do you have their respect? When you go out there, I feel like I'm a pretty good evaluator and being honest and realistic with myself and seeing how I match up. So I always kind of had that. And then like I remember I did a like 16U USA trial, went to Cary and tried out, actually didn't make the team. I was crushed. It was like the first time I was always good and made teams. And I remember crying and, being kind of pissed off that I didn't make it. But seeing all of those guys from all over the country and being able to compete and hold my own there was definitely a big confidence booster, like for me moving forward.
Well, people don't know this, I obviously do, but your squad back home in Arizona was some of the best players there are, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, Cody Bellinger is a buddy of yours, Cole Tucker, a buddy of yours, but who else really, I guess, poured into you as you were kind of coming up, whether that was in high school ball, even after in pro ball? Who would you say was the most influential in kind of that journey?
Definitely, I had a coach, Micah Franklin. He's done a bunch in this game too. He made it to the big leagues. He's played in Japan, Korea, Caribbean Series, Mexico. I mean, he's been all over the map as a player. And after that, he's scouted. He's been a hitting coach in the minor leagues. But going into my senior season, he ran the D-back scout team, and he really had a huge impact on how we all approach the game. He was preparing us for the grind of the minor leagues and the baseball lifestyle before we even knew it. And as I sit here now, older, I understand some of the method to his madness in preparing us for what we actually were going to have to go and do. I feel like when you're in high school, you think it's all hunky-dory and I'm one of the best players out here. I'm going to get to pro ball. Everyone's going to love me. This is going to be a breeze, right? And he was big on preparing us for that, what to expect when things go bad, coaches you might disagree with, all of those things. So I owe a huge credit to him for kind of, seeing that in all of us and guiding us, and kind of, I feel like I was almost, like an apprentice, to what this life would be even when we were in high school.
Hold on. So give me an example, like something that he would do for you at that age that you really didn't know you were going to have to go through?
There's a funny story. We were playing in, these travel ball tournaments you play at, 10 a.m. maybe, then the next game's at 1, championship at 3 or whatever, right? So we had a doubleheader. It was one of those things like if you win, you play later and you have to wait on the time and whatever. But Micah said, hey, everyone be here by, say, 4 o'clock, right? And we caught wind that we weren't going to play until the 7 o'clock game, but he said be here at 4 o'clock, right? So I was hanging at my friend's house, family's over there, parents, everything, think the game's later. We show up later for the game at 7, and he benched me that day. And he's like, what time did the manager say to be at the yard? Like, well, he said 4, but we're playing. No, none of that, right? Like, and my parents were not happy, right? They just drove 45 minutes to see this game. I've played every game. There's scouts there. There's all these things. And like, in the moment, I was mad about it because you want to play, but you start to realize, okay, you get into pro ball, like there's a meeting at a certain time. You're there. There's no questions asked. Not, oh, hey, I heard this, I heard that, So just little things like that. I mean, he was so brutally honest with us, and he evaluated us as, a scout, as people are going to see you once you turn pro, not just some high school kids that, have a little opportunity, and we are never coddled. And he kind of hardened us for what it takes mentally to survive in this world of professional baseball.
That's great. In Austin Riley's interview, he talked about something that his dad would just harp on him about. One was stretching, and then the other was like doing the rice bucket every single night.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything that your dad, or maybe it was Micah or any of these other coaches or people, had you do so consistently that you kind of laughed at the time, but looking back now you're like, oh yeah, I mean, that was so important.
I think not necessarily like workouts or anything, but my dad always would make sure that like we were working, right? Like I was a cage rat. Like Arizona Summers, 115, he's throwing to me in the cage. We're taking ground balls. Like that was my craft, and I was dedicated towards it, and I loved it, right? So the big thing for my pops was like, the minute that I have to ask you to go hit, like that's when we're going to have problems, because you don't want this for you, and you're not willing to put the work in it. And on the days where you're tired and you don't really want to go, and that happens to everybody, right? We don't want to do all of this stuff all the time, but that was kind of just a voice that was always there. Like, no, we're going to go get this work. Because it's all the cliche stuff you hear, but like being 5'7", not being, this huge national prospect per se in high school, like I knew that I had to work and hone my craft and enjoy it. And it's still the things that have got me to where I am today. So
when you were going through kind of the travel baseball world, and college is obviously on the horizon, and you're playing, let's just say you're going into your senior summer, what was the expectation that you had? And I asked that question because I think a lot of players, when you're ranked nationally, whether it's Perfect Game or PBR, one of these organizations, you start to kind of buy into this notion that, oh no, this is all going to come together for me. And whether you're listening to area scouts telling you, we really like you, you're going to be a top pick for us, you start kind of really buying into this belief, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. But one of the things that I've noticed is when that belief turns into you making the decision that like, I know I need to sign no matter what, I believe a mistake is made. I think a player, if they're kind of protecting themselves, should almost buy into the belief that I'm going to go to college, right? And if for some reason that doesn't happen, it's because an organization just bought me out of that opportunity. But if an organization doesn't, the reason I say this is you end up on campus and you're excited, because a college scholarship is exciting. You should look at it that way.
Right.
But when I've seen players buy into this, no, I'm getting drafted, I'm going to sign, it starts to turn into, well, college is a bad thing. College is like a backup plan. I don't want to go to college. And unfortunately, if you have a player who doesn't get offered the money that they wanted out of the draft, now they have these two decisions to make. One is, should I sign for less than I wanted? And now they're unhappy. Should I go to college and I really don't want to, and now I'm unhappy?
Right.
How did you approach that, I guess, that year going into the draft?
Right. I think just like you said, I think that college was something that was like a safety net almost, right? Like if this doesn't work out, this is a great opportunity. We could do it for 3 years and hopefully I'm in a better position, right? I will say though that with all of that stuff that you talk about with the area scouts, or, you have these meetings and you have 30 teams that come into your house at the kitchen table and you're doing a questionnaire and you're trying to answer every question perfectly. And my mom's got the house cleaned perfect because we want to, impress the scout, send the right message, and all of this stuff, right? And I think going into my senior year, I knew that I wanted to play pro ball, and I didn't really want to go to school, but I knew that I wasn't just gonna take this chance for pennies or for way less than would change my life and my family's life. So yeah, I remember on draft day, like I was hearing I was going to go in late second and then the third and then the fourth comes and there's nothing going on, right? So now you start doing the math like, well, how am I going to get the money that I thought I would go for? And then school started to kind of seem like, oh no, this is a backup plan, or I don't want to go do this, So I caught myself in my parents' back room, like, oh no, like I wasn't necessarily prepared to go to school because I wanted this so bad. And if I could go back and talk to myself then, it would have been completely different on like, hey, get what you're worth, and this opportunity will present itself again if all goes right. You know what I'm saying?
So obviously I've known you for a long time, right? I was fortunate enough to have represented you out of the draft and have continued to represent you. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the advisor thing. I think it's one of the things a lot of these families struggle making the decision with. How did you guys as a family analyze that decision? What was important? And kind of teeing it up for you here. Did it play out for you? Right?
Absolutely. I think my family, first and foremost, I mean, I'm an only child. We're very tight knit. My parents are East Coast people. We're very real and direct, and we don't want to be sugar coated. And I think the most important thing was having someone who's going to be in your corner no matter what. You know, all of us would love to sign, $500 million contracts, but that's not the reality of this game, right? So having someone that was going to have my back through thick and thin and be there for me when I call, they answer or they get back to me, and not because I'm this low on the totem pole of all of the clients they have or whatever, but because I'm one of their clients too, and then we're going to treat everybody, how they deserve to be treated. So those were big to us. Just not being sugarcoated, showing me the reality of what this was going to be, staying true to your word of, hey, we're going to have your back through all of it, which, I mean, a huge kudos to you. I was saying this earlier. I mean, yeah, you guys have probably spent more money on me than I've made you at this point in my career. And it's awesome to you stay true to your promise. And you hear the stories of guys in the clubhouse like, oh yeah, I'm not going to ask my agent for that or this or that, or he's not going to do this because they fell out of prospect status, which no one wants, right? But that's the reality, but through it all, I never hesitated to, ask you guys for anything. You're always there. And even when you're negotiating, my minor league free agent deals, right? Like that deal to me is just as important as the next guy's deal for $200 million, right? It's all relative to where we're at in our careers. And I always felt like that was the priority of like, hey, yeah, maybe this guy's going to make 10 grand in AAA this year, but that money is a lot to him at this stage. So yeah, you want someone who's going to be there for you, not just when everything's going great and you're in the futures game and you're a top prospect, and you want someone that's going to be there when you get released, when you get traded, when you get sent down, when you go through all of these things. So,
well, and I think, I feel for these families. It's why I asked the question. I feel for these families and these players because you could have all the information in the world. It's still a leap of faith. Right. I mean, at that point when we met you, we had only known you for a short period of time. Right. And so, I mean, look, it's kind of the impetus for this podcast is I want families and players to be much more educated than they otherwise would be without it.
Right.
And so naturally it's how much information can I give them so that when they make this decision, it's more of a confident decision they can make, even knowing it still is going to be a leap of faith. Right.
Absolutely.
So you obviously sign, right? You go into pro ball. Was there something that you felt like when you got into pro ball that you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize it was going to quite be like this? Was there a moment where you felt like, oh man, this is going to be a different animal?
I don't think when I first signed, so the D-back scout team, we would practice at the spring training facility. So like we were super privileged to have that. Cages, the fields, the jerseys were even the same. And I like signed and went straight to the AZL or complex league now. So it kind of felt like the same thing. I'm still in my backyard playing on the same fields, right? So that it didn't really hit me then.
You just said something that I think is interesting for everyone to hear. You signed with the Diamondbacks. You lived in Phoenix, right? So you're actually living at home for the most part,
right?
Seeing your parents all the time. Not every kid has that opportunity. So I can see how that can be even more comfortable for you going into it.
Right. Yeah. Like I would stay at the team hotel, but I mean, we'd have Sundays off or whatever.
Yeah, you're seeing your
drive
family.
home, get a home cooked meal. All my friends are still there. Right. So that didn't really feel like pro ball too much. But at the end of that year, they called me up to Missoula, which is not a team anymore.
It's not a team anymore. Yeah. Short season ball. They got rid of it. Yeah.
Short season rookie Pioneer League. And that's when I kind of got a taste of like, the bus rides and the actual fans being there and wearing a different uniform and all of those things and kind of really being on your own. And I think that's when it kind of hit me like I'm not at home anymore. Like you have to figure out a place to live, how to get to the ballpark every day, how to coexist with all these different teammates and all of that stuff. So
That's when it starts getting exciting though, right? I try to tell people when they go to the AZL or the GCL, which is the Gulf Coast League, you're at these stadiums, or not even stadiums, they're really fields, right? Like backfields. And the only people in attendance are parents, maybe a handful of fans, and really like the staff.
Right.
Right. There's no energy there, right? No one else is there. It doesn't feel like pro ball, but when you finally get sent to a place like in your case, Missoula, oh, there's a stadium now, right? I'm wearing a different uni. Oh, we're a team. It starts to feel a little bit more professional.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I think that's a big jump too. Like as a high school guy, this is the first time you're playing with kids that are in college or maybe repeating too. Sometimes these guys are 23, 24 years old. You're 17, 18. You're playing with people who have kids now, right? Like this is big boy business. And I think you don't really realize that until a little bit later in your career when you start moving up and see how it goes. You think when you first sign, it's like, oh, everyone's so happy that I'm here and I was this pick and I'm a priority, right? And that definitely wears off eventually.
How did you deal with signing and having these teammates where you kind of didn't feel like people were necessarily pulling for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think at the lower levels, it's definitely more prominent to have that feeling about teammates for sure. Because you come in, right, and you're this new toy that the organization values more, right? So the people that are there the year prior that felt the same way, they get a little jealous because it's like, oh, well, he plays my position. He signed for this much money, right? So you start to kind of feel this tension. But I think I've been very fortunate to where I've played with really good people, and what in the way that I was raised is like wishing bad on somebody else isn't going to make you look better, right? If me and said player both play second base, if he does bad, that's good for me. Yeah, maybe, but that's not good karma. It's not going to get you to where you want to go. It's not the right mindset to have when you're wishing against, people that you play with. If anything, and I say this a lot, most years, it's like to get to where we need to go, like especially in the minor leagues, right? We're all going to have to pull together and be able to lean on each other, right? My best years that I've had is because my team is playing good and we're winning and we're facing lesser arms in the bullpen. I have protection behind me hitting, he's scoring that run for me. I'm hustling to get him an RBI, so that's really what it's about. And I feel like as you progress and you get to the big league level when it's all about winning, all of that stuff kind of goes out the window and you truly have to be pulling for one another.
So you were a shortstop in high school.
Mm-hmm.
You get drafted, now you're in pro ball. Defensively, where did you start playing?
I played second base right away. I didn't play a day of shortstop when I got drafted. So learning a new position was relatively difficult, especially everyone's a shortstop in high school, right? And there's a sense of pride that comes with that. But surely I remember showing up to the AZL like my first day there and seeing the actual shortstops and being like, yeah, all right, I'm going to stay over here at second base, because it's just a different level.
And then, so first year in pro ball, obviously we talked about the AZL. The following year, you go to Missoula. The following year, you then go to South Bend, which is low A. And the barrel man kind of nickname starts to take shape, right? You start hitting really at every level that you go. To the point where in 2015, you're in Visalia, which is high A. You hit 319, 17 home runs, and 72 RBIs, right? Really good season.
Mm-hmm.
What was the takeaway for you at that point, up to that point in your career? As you were looking at your career start to take shape, what are you thinking?
Man, at that point, I think I started that season, I was 19 years old. I turned 20 that year, and I was killing it, right? So I'm like, oh, like, I'll be in AA next year. Like, I'll be in the big leagues in no time, right? Because I was doing so well. But I think that I started to kind of refine my approach at the plate. I didn't really know as much as I thought I did then, looking back on it. But I think that was the first year where I kind of had an idea of what I was trying to do, what type of hitter I wanted to be. So yeah, and like you said, like getting a couple years of affiliated ball, not being at the complex on your own again, playing with older guys, playing with guys that have been to double A before, triple A before, even some guys that have pitched in the big leagues or played in the big leagues in high A at that time. So you start to kind of polish and get a little more consistent and, pull from that.
So I want to talk about something that I think is really, really important for everybody to listen to, especially these parents. Players, when they're drafted, they get so hung up on how close am I to the big leagues, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, when you're first drafted, you're a few years away. And then every year that goes by, and the more you see guys from your draft class getting called up, the pressure and the weight starts to set in, to where you start thinking about, well, wait a second, how come I'm not at a higher level? Mm-hmm. And it starts to become this obsession, right? And I think the thing that's important for these parents to hear is, and really the players too, is, this is what I say, it does not matter the level that you're at until you are big league ready, mm-hmm. right? When you're big league ready, now let's start paying attention to where are you on the depth here. And I say that because you can get so just self-absorbed with this idea. Mm-hmm. And naturally, if this is a game of failure, if you're putting added weight on your shoulders, you're obviously going to perform worse, right? But I know I had a conversation with you at some point, and it actually wasn't quite in 2015. It was in the following years, where in 2016, you go to double A. In 2017, you go back to double A. And then in 2018, you go back to double A again, mm-hmm. right? And I remember talking about, I don't want to call it a study. That's kind of how I refer to it. But I basically went back and I looked at all of these players who would otherwise be able to say, I'm blocked, right? I'm this player with this organization, and I'm a third baseman or a second baseman in your case, and our organization has this superstar. He just signed a 7, 8, 9, 10-year deal. I'm never getting called up to the big leagues here. And the story I believe I shared with you was Gary Sanchez, right? So Gary Sanchez, who was a top prospect catcher for the New York Yankees, at the time was in double A and triple A. And I think got to the point where he was in triple A, and the Yankees signed Brian McCann to a 5-year deal. And this is a prospect who should be getting called up to the big leagues, I would say, in the next year. Mm-hmm. And they sign a catcher to a 5-year deal. Someone who's been, done a ton in this game. And if you're Gary Sanchez, it's easy to have seen that happen and say, man, I got no future here. I need to be traded. But what's interesting, and the reason I share this information is it's important for players to know you're never blocked. Everybody can play their way out of it. But the important thing is you have to remember that you have to keep playing. Because in Gary Sanchez's case, he goes off and he rakes. He gets called up to the big leagues. They end up putting him at DH catcher, I believe, and then even moved Brian McCann off the position so he could now be a catcher and became an all-star. So naturally, the performance opened it up for him. In your case, and I think, again, where the adversity comes in, so you spend 3 consecutive years in double A. You then get promoted after hitting 287 with 15 homers in your 3rd season at double A. You go to triple A and you hit 391 with 4 homers in the last 7 games of the season, mm-hmm. right? The following year, where did they start you?
Double A.
Back in double A.
And actually, after that stint in triple A, I got sent to double A that same year in 2018.
Right.
I ended up getting hurt like the next game back and missed the rest of the season. But yeah, so I started 4 full seasons in double A. And at the time, like, I wasn't really that old. I was 23, which isn't that old in double A, right? But I had been there for so long that it felt like it was forever, right?
It felt like you were blocked.
It felt like I was blocked by whoever it may be. Maybe the organization thinks X about me. There's nothing I could do to change that, and you get caught up in that. And Johnny Gomes, actually, he was a coordinator at the time for the D-backs, and he talked to me and he pulled me aside in spring training in 2019. So I'm going to be a free agent after the year. And he said, hey, look, it's not going to happen for you here. Just going to be straight up. But that doesn't mean that there's not 29 other teams out there, right? If you walk into a place and you want a pair of shoes, right? And you go to grab them and they say, oh, no, you can't have those. He's like, well, if there's 29 other pairs of shoes in there, you're going to leave with some shoes? And I'm like, yeah, I would like to think I'm going to leave with some shoes if I got the money in my pocket to pay for them, He's like, That's baseball. Keep showing up, keep going to the shoe store, and you'll get your pair of shoes eventually. It might not be the first, second, third pair. I'm on my, seventh organization now, but I got the pair of shoes eventually, and it's just kind of stuck with me to just keep showing up. Like, it's not about necessarily where you're at or what this organization thinks about you. Someone's always watching. You're playing for yourself in a sense, right? Like, you have to go out and post for your family, treat the game a certain way, play the game with intention, and eventually let the chips, fall where they may.
So a quick story. You know who Billy Beane obviously is. I'm at the High A All-Star game. This was back when the minor leagues had All-Star games. This was, maybe 20 years ago. And Billy Beane is talking to us, and his point in having this conversation was, I think a player may have asked him at the All-Star game, what do you have to say about a player who continues to perform in the minor leagues but doesn't ever get an opportunity? And what he says was actually something so simple but was profound at the same time. He says, do you actually think, as a general manager, I don't want to call up a big league player? And the guy was kind of stunned for obvious reasons, thinking like, oh no, that makes sense. You would want to call up a big leaguer. He goes, exactly. If you're a big league player, you are going to get to the big leagues. It may not be with the Oakland A's, right? It may not be with the organization that you're currently with, but I assure you that this game needs big league players, and you will find a way in the big leagues.
Very true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. And that's what it came down to. I got to a point where I was like, okay, I have done this. I've done good enough to keep getting jobs, right? Every offseason, someone calls me and says, hey, we want you to come play for us, right? With hopes of making it. And you get to a point where you're like, no, like, I know that I could do this. And if you don't realize that, someone else will. And you continue to just keep showing up. And eventually, like he said, it happened for me, And I didn't want to, like we mentioned, I'm 29 now, right? So I'm not this 17-year-old kid that just got drafted, right? And I started to have to deal with the fact of like, man, maybe this won't happen, right? Because you're taught your whole life, work hard, good things happen, keep your head down, right? And you get to a point where you're like, well, man, I'm doing that. And I've been doing that, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm grateful, and I'm putting up good numbers, and I'm improving on what I need to improve in with my game. And that gut feeling that I knew all along since I was 12 years old that eventually I would be this big leaguer, it rings true to exactly what he said. Like, if you keep showing up, you'll get there eventually, And like I talked about earlier, it's just loosening that grip and, finding solace in, okay, I believe this in myself. I believe I'm this player. I just have to keep on doing it regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you had to make the decision? Because that's what I hear you say, right? Like, the game is telling me something like, this is really hard. Why isn't it easier? And so you can go down that path of like, I'm getting cheated, I'm being screwed. It's easier for other guys. This is BS. Why me? Right? And a lot of players do this. And if you allow yourself to go down that path, where is that going to take you?
You're not going to play good.
Right.
It's simple, right? Like, if you asked any player, like, hey, if you're thinking XYZ, all of this negative stuff versus whatever your clear state of mind is to play better, like, well, yeah, that's going to be awful. So I already know thinking that way would just bring what I'm already expecting to come, right? So it's like, yeah, it's easy to think that. I know that won't work, right? So that was always my kind of, home base is like, yeah, all of these feelings and thoughts that you have about this are completely valid, and you'd be crazy if you didn't think these things. But it's not going to help you get to where you want to go. So we got to stay over here on this side.
Well, and it's also, as a player, not trying to avoid it, right? Oh, don't ever think negative. No, it's not realistic either. It's almost acceptance, right?
Totally.
Accept that this game is a game of failure. So naturally, you're not going to go 4 for 4 every day, and that's going to be okay. But how do you stay in the moment, and how do you put yourself in the most opportune position you can to when the opportunity presents itself, you take advantage of it, and you're in the right mental state to actually do that.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what it's about. Like, finding how you could show up to the yard every day and be the best player that you could possibly be and block out what you have to block out, focus on what you have to focus on, know that you're going to get kicked in the teeth a lot and be crazy enough to keep showing up and know that tomorrow might be a better day, right? If I'm in an over 15, well, I'm closer to my next hit than I am, like what's one more out, what I'm saying? Like statistically speaking, it's coming. And I think it takes a lot of time and at bats and struggles to get to that point, but that's what it's about. You look at the best players in the game, they're not worried about, XYZ. They're worried about the game they got, the pitch they got right then.
So we now are a free agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to that point in time in your career. So it's basically 2019, the end of 2019. And free agent for the first time as a minor leaguer. We had, plenty of teams that had interest. We ultimately decided that the San Francisco Giants were the best opportunity. Ended up going to big league camp for the first time.
Yep,
right?
Time.
Everybody knows probably where this is going, which is clock turns. It's now 2020. And what happens?
COVID season. So that was, at first you're thinking like, oh, okay, like we'll go home. Well, no one knew what it was, obviously. But then your wheels start spinning. You're like, wait a minute, like, are they going to keep me around? You start hearing whispers of a 60-man. There's no minor league season. And then ultimately I was released once that season started.
As were all the basically minor league free agents, because, there's no minor league season. So why are they going to keep you on and continue to pay it? Yeah,
absolutely. So I went to an indie ball league that summer in Sugarland. It was
Continued to rake.
Yeah, I did well there. It was like a 4-team league, and I had so much fun, man. Like, it was just travel ball again, right? There was there's scouts there, right? But there's no organization that you feel is there to judge you, or, it's just playing ball, we would play 2 games every night. There'd be a doubleheader, 4 teams. You're down the line with your bag waiting. Maybe you get some flips before the game, just like you did when we were in high school, and it was like,
did it loosen you up a little bit?
I was freeing for me. I finally was able to play without this, crazy chip on my shoulder. Like, I'm going to show them, or I'm going to do this so I can move up to the next level. Or I was just playing to play for the first time, probably in my professional career, which completely freed me up. And I'm happy that happened, right? Like, who wants to get released? Nobody. But if that doesn't happen, I don't know if I'm sitting here talking to you about this, you know?
Mike Piazza used to say he, at one point, he was in the big leagues for, at this point, like 16, 17 years, and is rehabbing, and they sent him to high A. This was when he was with the Oakland A's. They sent him to high A, and after having spent, I think it was like a week or 2 in high A, he literally says to us, he says, every player who spent a decade in the big leagues should be forced to go back to high A, because that'll remind him how good he has it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's the freeing up. It's realizing this is still a game and it's fun.
Absolutely. Like, as players, we want to do so good, so bad. And it's actually funny. I was talking to Cassis the other day. I think
Tristan.
When I got called up, and I was like, "What do you got for him?" Like in the dugout, not starting that day. I'm like, I played with him in Tokyo during the Olympics, so I know him well. And I was like, "What do you got for me? Give me something, some inspirational, whatever, nerves, first game." And he's like, "For this game to end, people have to fail. If no one failed during this game, the fans couldn't go home, we couldn't go home, it would never end. That's just not how the game works." So he's like, be conscious of how you fail. Like, do you fail the right way? Do you, take advantage of all the pitches in your at bat? If you make an error, is it an aggressive error? Are you running balls out? Like, just little things like that. And it kind of hit home for me. It's like, it's right. Like, for us to go home, a lot of people on this field got to have a bad day, right? Yeah. Whether that's the pitcher giving up runs or the guy who's going to go 0 for 4 and, leave runners on base. Like, it's going to go bad. It has to. So just be conscious of how you're going about that when the failure is coming, because it's inevitable.
I love that.
It's really cool. Like, you never think about it that way, right? Everyone shows up and wants to have a great game. Like, well, not everyone out here could have a great game because we can't leave. The pitcher's either going to have a bad game or the hitter's going to have a bad game. Like, there's going to be errors made. There's going to be situational hitting that doesn't get converted. But, like, that's the belly of the beast, It's going to happen every single day.
It's perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. After indie ball, okay, we end up signing a 2-year deal with the Milwaukee Brewers,
Mm-hmm.
right? People hear 2-year deal, they think, oh, millions and millions of dollars. It's a 2-year minor league deal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the decision was made at that point intentionally by us knowing, look, we need to, after having been released by the Giants during COVID, we need to ensure that we're going to get at bats,
Mm-hmm.
right? So after, after your first season, you end up getting a phone call from Team USA.
Yeah, actually, funny story about the Brewers. I did go back to AA for the 5th year. You remember that?
Yeah.
I started the season in AAA for the first time. Like, all right, sweet. I finally got here, could start here. I had a crazy first week, and they called me in the office on the Monday off day. It was like, hey, so-and-so's coming back. We don't have at-bats here. We want to keep you playing. We're going to send you to Biloxi. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah, like what more do I have to prove?
Like, I cannot make it out of the Southern League. Like, 5 years there, if you've ever been there, it's a tough go. It really is. So, yeah, I went back there, did my thing, did what I had to do, finally got called back up like a month later. And then I was raking at that point. Like, I was hitting pretty good. And I got called into the office. I still remember we were in Gwinnett. We got called into the office, and I'm thinking like, all right, it's 2 months in the season, I'm doing really well. Like, is this it? All my teammates are kind of looking like, oh, he's finally gonna get it. Pulled me in the office and like, hey, kiddo, you're going to the Olympics, and I'm like, what? Like, that is not what I was expecting you to say. But ultimately, still a cool opportunity, So I was able to go to Tokyo. We won a silver medal over there, and having made it to the big leagues now, I think I value that Olympic experience way more. I appreciate it way more because that wasn't my goal, right? Though super cool, right? To be able to do that, I didn't dream of being a baseball player in the Olympics, right? I wanted to be a big leaguer. So that almost seemed like not a step down, but just like a weird thing.
Well, yeah, because by the way, it's during the baseball season.
Right.
So everybody is back home in the States playing minor league baseball and major league baseball, and you're over in Tokyo playing for the Olympics.
Right. So it's like, yeah, this is super cool, but I want to make it to the big leagues, right? So like, how is that going to happen if I'm over here, And like my mindset about it wasn't necessarily in the right place. I still enjoyed myself and, met some awesome people, played for my country, have a silver medal. Like, that's awesome stuff. But at that time, I was so fixated on getting to the big leagues that I didn't appreciate it for what it was then, like I do now, for sure.
Was there a moment in the Olympics that you like cherish?
Yeah, definitely. I think the food hall was awesome. There's foods from all different types of, all over the world. It's open 24/7. And then just being in the village with all of the athletes that you would see, you see Simone Biles walking by you, or opening ceremonies. You have, Sue Bird's right there. You got KD behind you, and just like to be in that such elite company, it really hit home. And then obviously playing those games, like when you're playing for your country, there's like a different sense of pride that this isn't your run of the mill, AAA game on a Tuesday night with 1,000 people in the stands if you're lucky, right? So especially playing in Tokyo, playing the Japanese team, who was absolutely stacked, is basically their World Baseball Classic team. And yeah, just like competing and, coming together for that common goal was super cool. It went back to, like I said before, it's freeing because there's no scouting director to impress or GM to appease or hitting coordinator to look good to get this chance. You're just playing to win the game.
And so you come back to the States after. What was that like?
That was weird, man, because I was gone for like almost a month, it felt like. So just kind of hopping back into the AAA season was weird. Because, I mean, yeah, see you, James, go do your thing. But, like, it keeps moving on. You know what I'm saying? The season keeps rolling. So it was kind of tough to come back to that and then still have this idea that, like, I got to get called up. It was kind of hard to refocus. But I ended up finishing the season fine, and obviously didn't get called up that year either. But Yeah, it was a cool honor to have in the meantime.
Well, and then the second year we're with Milwaukee,
Mm-hmm.
I get a phone call from the Brewers, and they basically say, Matt, it doesn't look like we're going to have many at-bats for Jamie going forward. We do not want to release him. So we'll give you the authority to go reach out to other clubs and see if you can find a better fit.
Mm-hmm.
And we did with the Detroit Tigers. So then they traded you to the Tigers.
Yep.
And then from that point forward, again, talking about the positional thing, someone who's played second base. And at that point, you played a little outfield, played third base.
Mm-hmm.
You primarily were DHing with Detroit.
Yeah, I had an old school manager, and it was kind of, I guess, like, hey, this is the lineup we're going to run out there. This is where he fits best, and that's what we're going to do, right? So that was the first time in my career where, even though like I had been to AA a bunch and sent back down with Milwaukee and all this stuff, I still was probably 24, 25. So I still felt like you still think you're a prospect until something happens and you realize that, like, oh, like the game doesn't care about me anymore, right? Like this, I'm not entitled to anything, even though I think I'm doing good or I'm a good dude, people might like me. Like, you're not guaranteed anything. So that was the first time where I kind of was like, oh man, like I'm kind of like on the outskirts looking in. And that's when it started to kind of set in for me, right? Where you're like, how am I going to pull this off, right? Like I can't even play. They won't let me play a position. Like I could do that. Like I DH every day. Like, how does that look for other teams? You know, like I'm going to be a free agent again. Surely they're going to want to see me play the field. I remember there was like a Korean scout that came up to me before a game and was like, hey, are you hurt? I'm like, no, I feel fine. He's like, why haven't you played the field much this year? I'm like, I don't really know. It's kind of in the dark. That's not a calming feeling for sure. Especially.
Well, and that point in your career too, remember, you're almost, because you've been faced with so much adversity, you get to a place where you're like, I just need my bat in the lineup, right? Because how often were you playing with Detroit?
I played a good bit with them, but I would just DH every day.
Just DH. And so you're like, okay, if me playing second base meant I was only going to play twice a week, well, then I'd rather DH if I'm getting my bat in the lineup every single day. Right. So you start playing this game with yourself too, where it's like, all right, if this is the best it's going to be, then just give me my opportunity and let me go do it.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the conversation I had with Johnny Gomes. It's like, all right, well, this isn't the pair of shoes, but you got to keep showing up. And which is funny about that year is that I didn't, statistically, right, I didn't have one of my better years at all. But I did a lot of things well analytically that I didn't really know about. So going into that free agency, I was nervous. I'm like, man, usually going into it, I kind of had a good year to stand on and be confident, like, all right, I'm going to get another opportunity. This will be the year. This will be the year. But leaving Detroit after that season, I'm like, you didn't, I mean, I hit like 250 with like 11, which is not bad, but it's not knocking the door down. That doesn't necessarily scream like, hey, call me up. I'm ready to be in the big leagues, you know?
Yeah, you start looking for like reinforcement from teams. Like, do you think I still have it? Right. And the more teams that call in the offseason, the more confidence you get.
Right.
And that was an offseason where, yeah, we had some teams that reached out, but it wasn't as many as we had in prior years.
Absolutely.
And at that point, so then we end up signing with the Yankees. And I want to go through and just list out how you performed that season. So this was obviously 2023. So it was last year. You hit 294 with 21 home runs and 65 RBIs. Arguably the best season that you'd had up to that point in your career. Do you think that something clicked? Was it experience? Like, why did that happen? What do you attribute that to?
I think there's a couple things that went on, but I think the biggest things for me was, and I mean, I'm with the Red Sox now, so it's hard to,
we're going to get there. Yeah, we're going to get there.
Yeah, it's hard to.
We're going to talk about how the Red Sox made you better.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. But for the first time, I went to big league camp with them too, and it was my second time being in big league camp, and I had been around enough, right? So I kind of went into this like, all right, I'm going to get a real shot at this. I mean, I'm in camp with Aaron Judge and Garrett Cole, and the Yankees aren't just going to have you here as a charity case. They must see something, right?
Right.
And the AAA hitting coach, Trevor Amicone, I was like my second day there, and he had an iPad of what a major league hitter is to them, almost like a graph, right? He's like, hey, this is the type of hitter you are, and it's almost like a plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is how you did last year, right? So like there's 5 categories, whatever they may be. You were really good at this, really good at that. This was down. You've done this a lot better in years prior. If we could bump these things up, we think you could be this complete hitter and even above average with how you do that, right? So it was the first time in my career where I was able to see who I am to the analytics department, who I am on a computer, take all of the emotion out of it. This is you as a player to improve and to be this big league qualified player on this model. These are the things that you have to do. So that for me was a huge turning point to where I finally had an answer as to, okay, how could I make myself this big league hitter, this big league player to get to the next step, as opposed to with Arizona, right? I had 3 separate GMs, right? Within maybe 4 or 5 years, right? So that's just overchanged like crazy. So maybe with KT, like the next guy might not. Who knows what this one wants? So you're kind of unsure of what you're supposed to be doing. To everybody would love to go hit 300 with 40 homers, but
Sure.
That's not how it goes, right? So I was able to see who I was to the computer and how I could make that the best version of myself within the framework of attainable goals, whether that be controlling the zone more or hitting the ball in the air a little more or cleaning up my whiffing zone. So I kind of had the answers to the test for the first time in my career. So
Yeah.
I think it was easier for me to go out there and be like, all right, I do this good. You need to do this better and harp on that. And
What I love about what you just said and why it's resonating for me is what I hear you say. I finally got to see what the outcome needed to look like, and now I'm able to put a plan together to do it. And I see, like, you saw it visually, right? And so it finally like started to make sense in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could say the same thing about like, you know, the mental side of the game with like goals and things.
Mm-hmm.
Why do people at players feel overwhelmed? Because they don't know what they need to do.
Right.
They know that they want to perform at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
They feel the pressure of needing to perform at the high level, but they have no idea how to do it. They don't know who supports them, who doesn't support them. And it's like, oh man, I don't know if I'm capable.
Right. There's a lot that goes into finding yourself as a player. I think some guys figure it out at 21. Some guys realize who they are at 27.
Right.
Some, some never figure it out. We're all still chasing things, but to see, hey, this is what it is. This is what you need to do better at. That was very telling for me to say, like, okay, now I have something that I could work towards. And if I do this, it means I'm this type of player, and that's the player I want to be. So yeah, that was huge, as opposed to, like I mentioned earlier, trying to just show up and I hope they like it, you know?
Well, Jamie, and the reason why I wanted to have you on here is you are now a model for players who don't have it easy, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I would imagine if you would be able to look at a player when you were 26 and you were going through what you were going through, if I showed you, look at this player, look what he had to go through. It's just like what you're dealing with. Look what happened in a couple of years. He gets there.
Mm-hmm.
Keep at it. It's reassurance that, okay, this is for something.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's where I feel like now you provide that for so many other kids who maybe feel like I'm undersized, right? Chips are stacked against me. I've been released a couple times. I had to play indie ball, you know?
Absolutely.
And I'm not asking players to think in delusional terms,
Mm-hmm.
right? I obviously have shared how you've raked everywhere you've been.
Mm-hmm.
You continue to put in the work, but you are an example of things coming together if you keep at it.
You're right. Absolutely. And I think everyone's story is individual to them, right? Like, this is how my story went, right? If I could do it over again, like we talked about, like, yeah, there's certain things that I would have told myself back then or whatever, but maybe I wasn't in a place to hear them, or I wasn't mature enough or in the right frame of mind to apply them, right? None of these things that I believe and live by and make me the player I am today, I knew them 7-8 years ago,
Right.
but I wasn't able to actually apply them and put them into action, right? So it clicks for certain people when it clicks, you know?
Yeah. So that takes us to the Boston Red Sox.
Mm-hmm.
You play all last season. You put up the numbers that I mentioned. You don't get your call up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to you like you were performing at a level that deserved a call up. Other guys got an opportunity now, partly because they were on the roster. But obviously the Yankees were out of it last year, so they ended up calling other kids up who were younger, who you could make the argument were less deserving. But that's what teams do, right? So this offseason, we're a free agent again, or this prior offseason, and we've got a bunch of teams reaching out now, right? Just like a couple years before. And the Boston Red Sox are one of them. And I remember having a conversation with you, and it was the first time I saw this like twinkle in your eye about like, hey man, like, do you know how cool it would be if I make my debut with the Boston Red Sox? And why is that? Because you were born in Massachusetts and you still have family there.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, I'm from Holyoke. My parents are from there. I have my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. So even playing AAA ball in Worcester, like that's 45 minutes from my hometown. So it was awesome to see relatives and cousins I haven't seen in years that could come out and support me. And yeah, to be that close and to have 30 people at your game is awesome. And then obviously getting called up and making my debut in Fenway, like my parents flew in, like I had 30, 40 people there. My grandpa came he got to see my first hit. Like everybody just got to enjoy this experience with me. Holyoke, where I'm from, is not a big town. It's a rough city. It's hardworking people. So to have all my family and friends, you know, out on the dirt and the grass of Fenway and take pictures and, you know, people know that like this guy made it from where we're from. It's just so special. Like you couldn't write it any better. To do it close to home. It's really a dream come true, man.
Well, and for all the Red Sox fans out there who are saying, hey Matt, like why are you talking so much about the Yankees? Don't worry, everybody. He chose the Red Sox over the Yankees this offseason. They also wanted to sign him, and he chose the Red Sox. So,
yeah, I'm happy to be where I'm at.
Let's talk about family a little bit. Obviously, Coach, who is your mom, she was diagnosed with cancer.
Yep.
How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in September, last September. And honestly, if you've been around my mom, she just has this infectious personality and she's upbeat and she's positive and she's helping everybody and it's all right. And she's singing and she's just the best. Right. So to hear that news, it rocked me to my core for sure, because your mind goes to the worst places. Like I'm going to lose her, and how would I go on without having her? That's my first call I make my wife now, but throughout this, journey, my mom has been my saving grace. So to find that news out at first rocked me to my core, but how she approached it, it was like she was able to practice all of the things that she's preached to me my whole life, right? And to watch her absolutely show up to chemo with a smile on her face and wear her bald head and be golfing the next day after chemo, and it just didn't slow her down. I was talking to her yesterday and I was like, when we heard that news, like I think that she was able to stay so calm in herself and I didn't worry too much about it is because I know her and I believe in her. And it was almost like, oh no, like this is not slowing me down. I have a grandson now. James doing good. Like I have so much to live for. Like what's my plan of action? What appointments do I need to be at when? And boom, let's go. We're going to roll to it. We're going to smile through them. We're going to enjoy it. We're going to wear it on the chin if we have to. And her having that mentality made it a lot easier on me to be away and playing and know that she's in a good frame of mind. And back to, she would never sugarcoat how she's feeling. I'd talk to her every day. Hey, I'm doing good. But really, like, are you having a bad, like, how are you feeling? And she would open up a little bit, but she just stayed so strong, so tough. And yeah, she's in remission now.
Amen, brother. Love that.
Beat cancer, and like we know she would. And we just enjoy the little things, man. It's all cliche stuff, but she truly embodies it. She truly lives by it. And
When did you start calling her coach?
I started calling her coach in high school just because, like, me and my friends would sarcastically be like, yeah, you got it, coach, like to each other, you know? And I remember, like, I said it one day, she's telling me to do something. She's like, coach. And I keep saying it. And it just kind of stuck. Yeah. So now, yeah, hopefully my son one day calls her coach. So it keep the tradition alive.
Well, no, so you just brought up your son. So obviously now you're married and you have a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
How has being a father and a husband changed just your perspective on your career?
Greatly. You don't realize how many things in your life don't matter, aren't substantial until you have a kid. At least for me, like, I remember the day he was born. It's like, man, so many, not many things outside of this room with you and your mother really even matter to me, you know? So that kind of put baseball in perspective for me. And it's like he doesn't care if I do good, do bad. He just is excited to hang out with his dad and be around him, you know? So having that to go back to every night after a game, whether it be on FaceTime or if they're in the city with me, is like huge because it really doesn't matter. Like, you had a bad game. He still needs his diaper change and he still wants to hang out and laugh with you. So that's it's been a blessing, honestly.
It's a gift, man.
It's a gift. It took me to have a kid to get to the big leagues. So
right.
Maybe I should have him a little bit earlier. Yeah.
How about that?
It's my good luck charm.
That's great.
And like I was talking to one of my coaches in AAA this year, Doug Clark, and I was like kind of sad in the beginning of the season. It's cold. I never hit in April. Like, just kind of going through it, away from home now, missing a kid, right? So you have more, not excuses, but more reasons to be kind of down or not get it going, right? And I was like, Dougie, like, what do you got on playing when you have a kid as a father now, right? Like, you're not only playing for yourself, but you're paying to provide. Right now, this money that I'm getting paid is to make sure he could go to school, make sure he's fed, make sure he's got clothes on his back, the mortgage is paid, right? So you start to think about those things more so than it's, oh, it's another season, I'm going to play. This is your livelihood now for him. And I don't know if this is right or wrong, but he's like, look, when you're away from the field, you be the best husband and father that you can be, and you be present. When you show up to the field, you lock that in a box and you put it in your locker and you go out there and you handle your business, how you're going to do it. And when the game's over and it's all said and done, unlock that box and you go back to being husband, father. And that's really helped me. Not that you don't think about them still, but I can't be boo-hooing, oh, I haven't seen my son and my wife in 3 weeks. That's not going to help me hit this fastball. And the guy on the mound surely doesn't care.
Right.
So to be able to separate those and almost compartmentalize the two has really helped me moving forward. And I think that I could be a better husband and father when I don't take the game home with them, and I, in a sense, don't take them to the field with me. You're doing it for them and all of that, but there's enough mentally going on to be able to perform and play this game well. You don't need extra stuff to add to your plate. They're taken care of. I trust my wife with everything. She's a great mom. She's got it. My family's taking care of the baby, all of that when I'm gone.
If you could go back in time and tell young Jamie at 17 years old 2 things, what would those 2 things be? And the reason I say 2 and not just 1, because I oftentimes feel like, well, I would, you get other ideas and different things that you'd want to share. So what would 2 things be?
The first thing would be probably to relax. Don't worry so much about when or why this is happening, or just like buckle down and take it day by day. Truly, like I said, cliche again, but just worry about the day that you got and keep stacking those up. Keep stacking good days up. It's not all gonna happen how you want it to. You can't want it any more than you already do. Kind of loosen the grip, relax a little bit, enjoy this. You're gonna be fine, would be the first thing I'd probably tell him. And number two, I'd probably tell him that I'm proud of you, dude. Like, you got something bigger waiting for you. Don't worry about this stuff. Keep trying to figure it out. Don't run away from anything and never did. Like, keep trusting that feeling in your gut that you're going to make it and be this person that you've always envisioned. Like, trust yourself. So yeah, probably those two things.
I love that. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think you would love to share? And again, anything that you can share with anywhere from 13 to 18-year-old kid or mom and dad?
Yeah, no doubt. I think the whole kind of travel ball ascension into pro ball is like so glorified, right? Well, every travel ball dad or mom thinks that their kid's going to play in the big leagues or whatever, you know? And rightfully so, they should. Like, as a parent, you want the best for your kid. But I would probably tell people that it happens differently for different people for all different types of reasons, right? Not one kid's story is going to be the same as the next, right? Maybe one guy is meant to go to college and the other guy's able to handle it out of high school to go into pro ball. But I would say, like, focusing on, my dad always said, like, chase the dream, not the competition, right? Like, don't worry about who's ranked here or what offer this guy got or this dude signed for $1 million, or like, it all evens itself out. Like, the cream of the crop will rise. Like, once you get an opportunity, take it and be at peace when you lay your head on the pillow at night. Like, okay, I did everything that I could today to allow me to take a step closer to my goal. That's all that matters. None of the other stuff. No one's opinion of you or you need to do this, you need to do that. In certain cases, sure, but just like trust in yourself. And if you really want to do this, like, put the work in and see where the cards fall at the end of it. Don't worry about how it's going to go in this path, that path. Like, it's going to figure itself out, you know?
Would you say, as you were entering pro ball and now looking back today, how much different is your perspective on the game of baseball?
Man, it's completely different. I've been able to see it from multiple sides because I've had to, right? I've had to, instead of looking at it just from my perspective or my family's perspective or my friends who want it so bad for me, I've been put in positions where I have to understand what a GM is thinking, right? Not necessarily to play GM and make moves, but I have to understand what their job entails and how they look at the whole thing. Not just me individually, Jamie Westbrook, right? So I see it as a business way more, and I still love the game, but I had to realize what my place in the game is, right? I always like to say there's like tiers, right? There's like, you have the owners, say tier one. I don't think I'll ever know what it's like to be a billionaire owner, right? So that's a game I don't even care to play. Then there's tier two, where you have your front office, your GMs, your AGMs, your even coaches, scouts. And that's where things get muddled, right? Because we're close to those people. So it gets integrated more, you know, former players go do this, former players go coach. So we think we know what goes on in that level. And that is the biggest trap, I think. Being in tier three is where the players are, where it's just travel ball. It's just the game on the field. It's the same game I've been playing since I was 12 or 6 or whatever it is. And you focus on what your job is to do. My job is to play baseball to the best of my ability. And staying in that, I think, has given me it's rejuvenated my career. It's allowed me to play better. It's allowed me to enjoy the game for what it is more, not be so angry with the game and bitter. And I see it for what it is now.
Right.
And I'm happy that I was able to look at the game this way and see it in that perspective. Because for a while I was angry and I wouldn't watch baseball, and I just was so caught up in my own struggles that it was hard to.
There's, in a way, what I'm envisioning, like, you're not seeing the context at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a way, you're like a perfectionist trying to perfect this game,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't.
Can't do it.
And so naturally, it needs to fall apart on some level for
Right.
you to learn the lesson.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting too. And, you know, one of the questions we asked early on was, would you change anything? And I think for anybody who's listening, like the things that happen in your life ultimately form who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to go through those moments. Nobody wants to go through the failure,
Mm-hmm.
but it is through the failure that you're ultimately going to find the greatest success. And it's going to hurt, but undoubtedly it needs to happen.
Absolutely. The way I look at it is, right, like you go through all of these trials and tribulations, not just to feel pain and to get through them, but those help you later on in life when you go through stuff that's going to be harder.
That's right.
But now you have like a tool bag, or if golfers out there, like you got a different club in your bag. Like instead of just having the driver all the time, like, okay, well, that happened to me back in AA and da 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 da. Let me pull out this club to handle this situation. And you're just more well equipped for what life's gonna throw at you, whether that be with your family, whether your mom having a cancer diagnosis, whether it be, like there's so many different things that I'm able to pull what I learned from my career and apply them to life. And I wouldn't change that for the world.
We advised a kid who was at an event recently and, you know, wasn't happy with how he performed at this event and really was taking it hard on himself. And I had a conversation with him and I said, look, this is going to sound completely funny to you, or maybe not even funny. Maybe it'll infuriate you. I said, but I'm glad that you just went through what you went through because it is a great learning moment. You can't have the same mindset. And what he was doing ultimately was every single at bat, he needed to get hit. He was all results oriented.
Mm-hmm.
He was driven, as I think the majority of kids are, by that perfectionist mentality. I have to just show everybody how good I am every single pitch, every single at bat. And it's not realistic.
Mm-mm.
And so learning that lesson at such a young age, I think is so valuable. But what's interesting in one of the podcasts I shoot with a mental skills guy by the name of Johan, one of the things we talked about is this book called The 3 Laws of Performance. And the first law is people perform based on how the world occurs to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if the world is occurring to you, or if the game is occurring to you as I have to go out there and be perfect, and if I'm not, the world's not going to tell me I'm good enough to be here,
Mm-hmm.
you're setting yourself up for failure. So how do you, instead of looking at that occurrence as like that's fact,
Mm-hmm.
it's not fact. It's occurring to you in this way. Let's change that, right? Let's get your focus off of that into something else. And that's where I think, like, when you talk about the mental side of the game, like there's so many opportunities for growth there. And as I think about your career and I look at all the things that you've overcome, I mean, you're one of the smartest and most disciplined minded players I've seen. I think a lot of players, the majority, would probably have given up a long time ago, and you never did.
Mm-hmm.
And I honor you, man. It's incredible to be here with you, to be on the journey with you. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. Grateful for you too. It's been a cool story to say the least, man.
It has.
It's I'm glad I kept showing up. And here we are.
Okay, so last question. How'd you get the nickname Barrel Man? Other than you raking?
So I got traded to Toledo in 22 for cash. That guy gets traded every year. It's crazy.
Cash. That's great.
Mr. Considerations. And I was there for like a month. I wasn't really hitting, kind of like never been traded before, kind of getting my feet wet. Like I'm not really playing the field. So like I couldn't really get it going. Remember we were in Columbus one day and I was like, all right, dude, like you got to get it going. Like today's the day. Like went back to my old hitting journal, watched some video, the whole 9, straight panic button. And first at bat, I hit a home run. I'm like, here we go. That's the barrel, right? So I'm coming home and there's like some fans kind of like chirping me or whatever on the on deck circle. And like before I get to the dugout, all my teammates that don't really know me, I've been there for a month, are waiting. And I'm like, I'm the Barrel Man. Like me. I'm the Barrel Man. Like I just lost it. And I'm a goofy guy,
Your alter ego, I guess.
My alter ego, right? And my teammates are like, what did he just say? Like, this guy's hitting like 190, like 1 homer, and you're the Barrel Man. Like, sure. Like, I didn't even think about it that way. just like kind of talking to myself, like, you knew it. Today was the day. So like, all right, barrel man, and then like my next at bat, whack, like next one after that, whack. I think I had 4 hits that day, right? And it kind of stuck like, oh, he wasn't playing around, and kind of got on a hot stretch, and then it took a, mind of its own at this point, and then it's kind of followed me everywhere I've gone. Someone that played with me in Toledo must have knew someone that played with me with the Yankees, and they mentioned it, and then the media catches hold of it, and now it's the barrel man. But yeah, I'd stand by it, man.
Not a bad one.
It's not a bad nickname to have, and like honestly, like at the end of the day, like I know that of myself, like dude, no matter where you're playing, the big leagues, low A, rookie ball, winter ball, like you can put the barrel on the ball. Like that's kind of my chi, dude. Like I know I could do that at the least. So
well, no, and I will say, when you got called up, the number of people with organizations that aren't with the Red Sox even, and a bunch of the front office with the Red Sox even reached out and were like, couldn't be more happy for the guy. But so many people, from scouts to player development guys that have known you and been a part of your career, reaching out saying, I couldn't be more happy for this guy, is pretty incredible. That does not happen.
Absolutely. I heard from a lot of people over the years, whether it be an area scout that I had in high school or coaches that I've had. I heard from a lot of people from a lot of different places, which was really cool because it's not to toot my own horn, but it's a credit to the type of person I am and how I went about my business. And I feel like I have the respect of a lot of people for how I've went about this journey. And one of the coolest things now is like, almost any big league team that we're going to play against or any roster, I've either played with someone at some capacity or had a coach or a trainer along my journey, or there's been people that I played against that I knew well coming up. So it's been cool to, during BP, you see a bunch of people you haven't seen in years. And like almost everybody that came up to me just gives me a big hug. He's like, dude, finally, man, like I'm so happy for you. Like, and it's genuine, and you could tell like you deserve to be here and what's coming towards you, whether I play 10 more years in the big leagues or I'd never play another one in my life. I'll always have that impact, and I'm proud of myself for doing it.
Same here, man. Well, thank you for joining us here.
Of course. Good to be here.
Means the world.
It was fun. My legs,
it was a blast.
My legs falling asleep, but
oh boy,
it's good.